One morning, my boyfriend Mike and I were getting ready in the bathroom when I noticed them for the first time. He was leaning over the sink, brushing his teeth, with his bare back exposed. That's when I saw a cluster of bumps scattered across his skin. They looked like pimples, raised and pearly, with this gross brownish-yellow tint. It struck me as odd. Mike was 25, well past the age when pimples should have been a problem. I thought breakouts were something you left behind in high school. I tapped him lightly on the back and jokingly asked if I could pop one. But his reaction? It threw me. He jerked away so fast, arching his back out of my reach, and then turned to me with this wild look in his eyes. He hissed through gritted teeth, "Don't touch them." That shut me up real quick. The way he snapped made it clear those pimples weren't something I should mess with. I figured he was embarrassed, probably self-conscious about me seeing them. So I decided to leave it alone. Over the next month, though, Mike went out of his way to hide his back from me. He started wearing a shirt to the bathroom, even when brushing his teeth. If he needed a shower, he'd lock the door and make sure I couldn't come in. Our intimacy fizzled out too, which I assumed was because taking his shirt off would expose the pimples. This weird behavior went on for about 3 weeks. No matter how hard he tried to conceal them, I'd still catch glimpses of the bumps under his shirt. They were growing, no doubt about it, swelling and bulging more with each passing day. Then came that one night. I woke up in bed and found Mike lying next to me, his back turned. Curiosity got the better of me. Carefully, I lifted his shirt to take a peek. What I saw made me question my sanity. Maybe I was half asleep, or the dim bedroom light was playing tricks on me, but I swear I saw those bumps moving, like they were wriggling under his skin. Before I could get a better look, Mike shifted in his sleep and rolled onto his back. After that, things escalated. The bumps got huge. So big, it was impossible not to notice. Even though it was the middle of summer, Mike started wearing heavy coats to work to keep them hidden. Meanwhile, he was wasting away. His face got gaunt, his cheeks hollow, and his arms and legs lost all their muscle. It was like those things on his back were sucking the life out of him. I couldn't stand by and watch him deteriorate anymore. I knew he'd told me to leave it alone, but I had to do something. So, I called a doctor to try and schedule an appointment to get those things removed. Mike must have overheard, because midway through the call, he stormed into the room, snatched the phone from my hand, and hurled it against the wall. It shattered into pieces. I just stood there, frozen, staring at the mess. Then he started yelling at me, completely unhinged. I couldn't make sense of most of what he was saying, but I caught bits and pieces. He called me a traitor and accused me of trying to take away the one thing that made him happy. Then he said something that chilled me to the bone. "They're my babies, and I won't let you take them from me." Before I could even process that, he shoved me out of the room. He came back with my purse, threw it at my feet, and dragged me to the front door. As he pushed me out, he said I'd interfered with his private business and that he'd let me back in when he was ready. Then he slammed the door and locked it behind me. I pounded on the door, shouting for him to let me back in, but he didn't respond. Eventually, I gave up and left. That was 2 weeks ago. I've been staying at a cheap motel while trying to sort out a better living situation. There's no way I'm going back to Mike. Not with the way he's been acting. I've since replaced my phone with a basic one that can handle calls and texts. Which brings us to today. I got 2 messages from an unknown number. The first one said, "You can come back home now. The pimples are clear." The second, much worse one read, "My babies have finally hatched, and they want their mommy to come home." I don't know how many times I reread that message, and each time it only sounded more alarming and disturbing. There was no way in hell I was returning to Mike. I wasn't an idiot. That message was far from a warm, welcoming invitation back home. I'd contemplated safer options, like calling the cops to check on him. The issue was, I didn't know what I'd even begin to tell them. Maybe, "Hi, could you please search my boyfriend's apartment because his pimples hatched, and I'm worried whatever came out is going to eat me?" It sounded insane. I wondered if I should text him back, but I was at a loss for words. So, I did nothing. Absolutely nothing. I just stayed holed up in my motel room, frozen and useless. Sometimes I'd lie in bed for hours, staring blankly at the ceiling. Other times, I paced the room, trying to burn off the restless energy. I kept myself busy with chores, cleaning the already spotless space over and over again. I'd even taken a week off work, telling my boss I wasn't feeling well. It wasn't a complete lie. I wasn't in any shape to face the world, and part of me worried Mike might show up at my job. This went on for a week. Then, one night, I heard a knock at my motel door, and an eerily familiar voice to go with it. Mike. I froze, my stomach knotting. How had he found me? I hadn't told him where I was staying. None of my friends or coworkers knew my exact location either. It didn't make sense. Hey, Sarah. Listen, it's just... I didn't let him finish. How did you find me? I demanded, my voice trembling. He paused for a moment before responding, his tone disturbingly casual. It was a bit difficult to track you, believe me, but they managed to use your scent. My blood ran cold. My scent? Who was they? They'll do anything to find their mother, he added. I cringed, my whole body recoiling at his words. Mike, who are they? He didn't hesitate. If you let me in, you can meet them. My heart pounded in my chest. He brought them here? Whatever they were close. I'm not letting you in, Mike. Not you. Not whatever you've got with you, I snapped. Okay, fine. Then at least crack the door open a bit. Just enough to see me. And make it easier for you to force your way in? No thanks, I shot back. Then I noticed the peephole on the door. Slowly, I stepped closer and peered through it. Mike looked terrible. His dark hair was a disheveled mess, and dark circles shadowed his hollow, skeletal face. He wore an oversized black coat, thick, woolly, and far too heavy for the season. At first glance, it seemed like the coat was just bulky, but as I looked closer, I saw it wasn't just the fabric. Two faint bulges pressed against the material, one on his chest and the other on his thigh. Both were about the size and shape of a football, and they weren't still. The outlines shifted slightly, quivering ever so faintly. What's under that coat, Mike? I asked, my voice shaky. Like I said, Sarah, I can show you if you just let me in. No. I took a deep breath, forcing the words out with as much strength as I could muster. Listen to me, Mike. I don't know what you've turned into, but I want you, and whatever those things are, gone. Leave. Sarah, Leave. I barked, cutting him off. The silence that followed was unbearable. I could still feel him standing on the other side of the door, probably trying to think of something to say. Finally, he sighed. His footsteps moved away, growing fainter until they disappeared completely. I slumped to the floor, my head resting against the door. Relief washed over me, but it was mixed with guilt. Had I done the right thing? That night, I barely slept. I tossed and turned, trying to convince myself Mike wouldn't come back. But deep down, I knew he might. Just as I was starting to drift off, I heard it. A faint breeze coming from the bathroom. I froze. All the windows were shut before I went to bed. Gripping the butcher knife I'd been keeping under my pillow, I crept toward the bathroom. When I peeked inside, my heart dropped. The window was open, just a crack. That's when I heard the abrupt noise of a crash from the living room. My heart lurched, and I nearly jumped in my spot. I swiftly turned around to face the short passage that led to the living room. I tried to hold the knife tightly in my hand, though it shook uncontrollably, and proceeded with trembling footsteps to the source of the sound. Once I arrived in the living room, I saw what had crashed. It was the hotel vase that held a pot plant near the front door. As I stepped closer, I won't lie to you when I admit I nearly pissed my pants, because the door was wide open. The front door's key that I'd hidden under the vase was neatly fitted into the lock. The door wasn't even broken, and there were no signs of forced entry. Somebody had retrieved the keys and unlocked the door from inside. While I stared dumbfoundedly at the sight of the open door, I heard something else. Footsteps from behind me. I whirled around to look, but there was nothing there. I couldn't accurately see in the dim, unlit space of the living room, but it appeared as if nobody else was inside, yet I still heard the scuttling of feet close to me. As they continued approaching, I pinpointed the source of the sound, coming from above. I never thought to check the ceiling. As I cranked my head up to look, I saw the hair-raising sight of what made the sound. From what I could make out, I could faintly see a creature with a shimmering, silver outer casing and an oval, segmented body, with multiple spindly legs sprawling out. It looked similar to a nightmarish spider or crab. It had sharp slits for eyes, maybe 5, which faintly glowed orange. Its body was the size and oval shape of a football. The memory of what hid under Mike's coat resurfaced, and I realized what it had to be. The thing clung onto the ceiling, standing perfectly still, staring directly at me with its beady eyes. I was so distracted by the sight that I accidentally let my guard down. Without warning, I felt a hand tightly cover my mouth from behind with some sort of rag soaked in liquid. As I inhaled the pungent, sour scent of the fumes in the fabric, I felt my alert state of mind rapidly slip away until I felt sleepy and collapsed to the floor. Before the final dregs of consciousness faded away, I heard Mike's voice. "Looks like Mommy's coming home after all." I woke up, tied down onto a bed. At first, I strained to gradually lift my eyelids in a grueling effort to wake up. In my sleepy days, I was still able to sense how my head laid on some soft, cushioned surface. My body felt warm and cozy for some reason. I felt comfortable until I tried to move my body but realized I couldn't. There was some cold material snaking across my arms and back, digging into them and preventing me from getting up. They were probably chains Mike had devised to restrain me. At best, my neck wasn't tied down, so I was able to mobilize it and crane my head upwards from its face-down position to survey my surroundings. My vision was still slightly blurry and fuzzy, though it was clearing as my awareness sharpened. At the very least, I could somewhat make out a few details in my immediate vicinity, like the surface I laid on. It was a bed, and at the head of it was a red, furry pillow. As I looked behind me, I discovered the reason why I'd felt so warm and cozy was because I had some thick blankets wrapped over me. There was a sense of familiarity to this bed, and soon I realized it was the bed that Mike and I used to sleep in back when we were together in his apartment. I briefly wondered whether I was in fact in his apartment, but as I inspected the area beyond the bed, I realized it to not be the case at all. The room I was in was truly expansive, stretching out as far as I could see around me. A few sections were harshly lit with white, fluorescent lights. Most sections were unlit, blotted in darkness. Luckily, my own section was lit. From what I could tell, the entire area appeared mostly empty, save for a few materials haphazardly strewn around like ropes, wooden crates, metal shards, corrugated iron sheets. The walls and floor were made of dull, gray concrete, which was cracking and buckling in some places. A thick layer of dust had settled over the floor, signaling to me that I'm in a place that has not been well cleaned or maintained. From all these clues, I figure out I might be in some abandoned factory or warehouse. I noticed that the place was devoid of windows. This meant I couldn't even look out of the place to have some sort of idea of where this building was situated. Mike had likely chosen this secret location on purpose. There were no doors either, but I did see at a far corner, on the front side furthest from the bed, there were some stairs which led upwards into a small balcony leading to a single door, painted blue. That's it. That's all my neck allowed me to see after straining it in different directions. I had no other clues for where I was. Soon my single source of answers had arrived because I heard that blue door creak open and footsteps walking across the balcony and down the stairs. I knew who it was before I even saw their face. As the tiny figure in the distance grew as they approached, their features became more apparent to me. Mike wore a baggy pair of blue jeans but remained shirtless. I figured it's likely because he didn't need the coat anymore to hide them. I noticed how thin he'd gotten. His ribs poked out through his chest, and his arms were skeletal and bony. He was so paper thin it looked like he hadn't eaten in weeks. He stopped a few meters from the bed and smirked at me. "Hey, Sarah," he said softly, still wearing that grating smile. I kept my face stony and devoid of emotion, except for the slight rage that peeked through. "Sarah, I promise I'm not going to hurt you. You fucking kidnapped me, you psycho," I snapped, my voice sharp and seething with hatred. "And now you have me tied down. You honestly want me to believe you won't hurt me? Look, I know you're mad, but I'll explain everything soon," he said as he inched closer to plop next to me on the bed. He moved his hands to stroke me on the cheek before softly whispering his next words. "But before I do, I want you to meet my new family." He stood up, placed his fingers over his mouth to whistle loudly. I instantly heard the sound of what sounded like a million scuttling footsteps approaching us. I realized he was calling them, and like well-trained dogs, they came running. I turned my neck in different directions to look, but they weren't there. I realized that they were crawling in from the ceiling again. As much as I strained my neck, it was hard to angle it in such a way that I could spot the creatures. Mike saw me struggling and helped prop me up by the chin with his hand, so I could finally see the ceiling. There were dozens of them that had emerged from the dark recesses of the ceiling to flood above us. I'd already partially seen how they looked previously in my bedroom, but this time I was aided by the bright lights to see their appearance in painful detail. Their oval bodies were covered in an outer, glossy casing like an exoskeleton that shimmered silver. They had a slightly segmented body like a millipede. Their multitude of furry, dark red legs radiated out from their bodies. I counted and discovered that each one had 12. Worst of all were their eyes that dotted the segment of their body that belonged to their head. 5 of them. Each glowed like a golden emerald, watching me unblinkingly. Do you see how intently they're watching you? They love seeing their new mom, Mike whispered, though I tried my best to ignore his voice. One thing I noticed too was the cacophony of sounds they made. It sounded like a chorus of chattering and clicking noises that might have emanated from their mouths, like they were talking with each other. Mike then snapped the fingers of the free hand that wasn't holding me up and made 3 clicking sounds with them which echoed up towards the horde of creatures at the ceiling. It seemed like he was signaling for them because one of the creatures detached from the ceiling and dropped down. I thought it would hurtle to the floor, but I was surprised as it unsheathed wings it kept hidden within the folds of its body. It fluttered gracefully to the floor to land next to Mike. I noted it reached Mike's knee in terms of height. "This one's name is Daphne," Mike said as he motioned toward the monstrosity that stood next to him. I nearly giggled at the fact that he actually gave this disgusting thing a name, but I was too dazed and shocked at its sight to laugh. Mike let go of my chin, seeing how I didn't need to stare at the ceiling anymore. I watched as he moved his hand to stroke and caress the creature on its underbelly. He scratched it lovingly, like one would do to a dog's belly. The worst part is I could hear the creature purr in pleasure like a cat would. "Daphne's pregnant, you know," Mike spoke as he continued to caress her belly. "And she's just looking for a new place to plant her new eggs." "What?" was the only word I could mouth as I fumbled to understand what he was saying. "I would let her use my body again, but unfortunately I feel drained from the last batch," he continued to ramble on. "Mike," I muttered in a low, dangerous voice. "What the hell are you talking about?" "Well, in simple terms, the babies complete a part of their life cycle in a human host. Think of it like being a second mom for these babies, Sarah." I saw the creature, Daphne, lift its wings and was into the air before hovering above me and landing on my back. I felt its furry legs brush against my skin. "No. Mike, no. Please stop it." I struggled hopelessly against my restraints as I continued to plead with Mike to let me go. My mouth was agape, and I heaved for breath in a flurry of panic. I felt it crouch low onto my back and deposit the eggs onto multiple spots on my back. I don't know how long the ordeal lasted for. It could have been a few minutes, maybe an hour. Then the creature opened its wings and flapped away again. It was done with my body. Mike approached me, and I felt him plant a greasy kiss on my cheek. My eyes were shut as tears flowed through them, and I shook helplessly in my spot, lacking the strength to even turn my cheek away. "That wasn't so bad, was it?" he asked rhetorically, knowing I couldn't answer in my state. His last words unsettled me with their ominous meaning. "Don't worry. You'll grow attached to them, just like how I did." The first half of the month was pure torture. Mike force-fed me while I laid face down in the bed, in my chains. He tried to make conversation with me, but he'd be met with my silence. I want to say the worst part was feeling the eggs on my back, but, weirdly enough, they didn't hurt like I expected them to. Sure, I was getting a bit thinner as I felt the eggs grow, but I didn't feel pain or anything. And I know it sounds twisted for me to admit, but it kind of felt fascinating to feel the life in the eggs grow on my back. I could eventually feel them wriggle and move about in my skin, but honestly it just tickled, and at times I giggled from the sensation. Eventually their birth occurred 3 weeks later. When they hatched, I tried acting disgusted when I saw the larvae crawl out from my back, but I didn't. I simply felt a strange feeling of accomplishment surge through me, knowing I played a huge role in creating and nurturing these creatures to life, like a mother. They might look ugly on the outside, but they are sweethearts once you get to know them. Over time, I accustomed myself to stroking and petting them. The way they purred in response was cute. I grew to understand their clicks and calls. I'd whistle for them to come to me. Eventually, Mike even let me out of my chains and monitored me while I played with them, making sure I wouldn't run away. I wouldn't do such an absurd thing anyways. I'd never abandon my babies. It's cheesy to say, but I think Mike was right when he said I'd grow attached to them. Mike recently spoke to me and said he wants us to be a happy family and that we can't keep hiding ourselves in this abandoned building if we should prosper. I agree. We are currently making plans to one day emerge and make the world accept us and our children,